3D printing is the future, and the future is here. We are on the verge of another industrial revolution, and I'm incredibly excited to be a part of it. I'm a photogrammetry software designer, and I've spent the last 4 years working with fashion and clothing companies. I even worked at Nike for a while. They're already beginning to 3D print shoes. I recently had the opportunity to apply my skills to a medical laboratory where they're beginning to 3D print human tissue. It's an ingenious concept, suspending living cells in a smart gel which allows the cells to fuse together into tissue once they're in alignment. The smart gel is then washed away, leaving an organ of purely human tissue. We're the first company to replicate organic vascular structures, Dr. Hansaf claimed on my first day there. He led me through the sterile halls which droned with dull fluorescent lighting. The organs we print can diffuse oxygen and nutrients even more efficiently than those in your body. Several other lab technicians passed me in the hall. I smiled, but each averted their gaze immediately, finding a sudden fascination with the blank floor tiles. It sounds like you know what you're doing. What do you, Tobias Swade, COM339 need me for? I asked. Our scaffolding needs to be remodeled. One of our organs seems to be leaking, and we can't figure out why. Which one? He didn't need to answer though. As soon as Dr. Hansaf opened the door at the end of the hallway, I saw the most macabre sight I could have imagined. A steel table was lined with row upon row of human eyeballs, each staring at me from their great, unlinking orbs. Leaking might be an accurate term, but they would be better described as crying. The saline liquid filled each eye to overflowing before draining into a multitude of tiny pools upon the table. Quite beautiful, aren't they? He said, and I jumped a little to realize how close he was behind me. Almost perfect, almost better than perfect. This design can see 3 times sharper than a human with 20/20 vision. It can even see beyond the traditional visual electromagnetic spectrum, perceiving some of the near ultraviolet spectrum as well. Beautiful isn't the first word I would have chosen, but I could understand his pride. They looked real enough that you wouldn't look twice if a pair of these was staring back at you from a human face. The modeling software is on that computer. He gestured to a desktop workstation in the corner which was set up beside a second door. You'll find all the current designs on there. I'll give you some time to look everything over and see if you can't find the issue. I'll be back to check on you in an hour. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the eyes. I nodded stiffly again, hearing the door close behind me. I wasn't about to ditch 51 sleepless nights 340 a job just because of the unsettling environment. I averted my eyes from the table and walked over to the computer. While it was booting up, I cast another glance behind me. My heart skipped a beat. Each of the eyes had turned to watch me. They were facing the door a moment before, but now they were facing me. I slowly walked back to the door I came in, watching them this time. They turned to follow me. Without even realizing I was doing so, I put my hand on the door. Locked from the outside. There was a small glass viewing window in the door, but I couldn't see anything besides the hallway wall. Hello, Dr. Hansaf. I knocked on the door. No answer. I turned back, but the eyeballs were pointed toward the opposite door now. I took a deep breath. They weren't watching me. It was ridiculous to think they were. There must simply be some fast twitch muscles activating from the salt in the saline solution. I walked to the second door, locked as well. It was a high-security laboratory though. It wasn't unreasonable to think the doors automatically lock. The doctor must have forgotten about it, but he was going to be back in an hour. I just had to focus on my job. I glanced back at the eyeballs, but they were still facing the door. I sat back down at the computer and loaded up the photogrammetry software. Pretty soon, I was so engrossed at inspecting the intricate scaffolding that I didn't even think about the eyes behind me. The secondary door opened beside me. Had an hour passed already? I turned, but I didn't see anyone in the room. Maybe he just peeked inside and saw I was still working. I turned back to the computer again. Tobias Swade, COM341 footsteps. I spun around, but I still didn't see anyone there. I was about to go back to work when I noticed all the eyes were moving once more. Footsteps. Each one was slightly closer, slightly louder. The eyes were all following the empty space of ground where the sound was coming from. Something was there and I couldn't see it, but the artificial eyes could. Hello, I pushed the chair between myself and the footsteps and pressed my body against the desk. Is somebody there? The chair moved, and the footsteps got closer. I lurched backward into the wall and started moving around the room toward the door I entered from. Dr. Hansaf, I yelled. Let me out of here. I pounded on the door. Still locked. Footsteps. The eyes were all pointed directly next to me. Something is in here. Help, I screamed, slamming against the door with my shoulder. A face appeared in the viewing window. One of the lab technicians. He watched me for a moment, then began to write something down on a clipboard. What in the hell? I pounded on the door again and he looked up. I know you can see me. I yelled. Let me out of here. The lab technician tapped the side of his left eye. Then his right. He pointed at me. What was he trying to say? I glanced over my shoulder. The eyes were all watching the ground directly behind me. Tentatively, I reached out my hand and felt something cold. 51 sleepless nights 342 and slimy in the air. It was just a couple inches from my face. Something like a hand loosely grabbed me back, but I quickly drew away. It didn't touch me again after that. What are you? I asked the empty air. Footsteps. The eyes followed them back to the corner of the room. What in the hell was going on? I turned back to the door. The lab technician was holding a piece of paper up against the glass. Would you like to be the first person to see it? I glanced back at the corner of the room. I nodded. The lab technician wrote something and held it up again. We will need to replace your eyes. Is that okay? I shook my head. He started writing again. He's not the only one. They're everywhere. We're not safe. I heard the second door open. I turned to see the eyes follow the thing out of the room. The door closed again. The primary door opened at once, and Dr. Hansaf entered. He was smiling like we had just shared a private joke. Well, what do you think? What the fuck was that? I asked. We don't entirely know, he admitted. It's something which is only visible in the near ultraviolet spectrum, but machines aren't able to detect it. We only started noticing them once we printed the eyes. So you lied to me. You brought me here as a guinea pig. Tobias Wade, Com 343. He shrugged and put his arm around my shoulder. I pushed him off. This is a laboratory. You shouldn't be surprised to find experiments being done here. But you came voluntarily. You will leave voluntarily, and you will only continue participating if you choose. Will you take the eyes? Absolutely not. I want no part in this. I was already marching down the hallway. I wish I had taken them though, because I heard footsteps following me all the way home.